Max Weber, one of the greatest sociologists in history, left a profound mark on the understanding of modern society when he described a metaphor that still resonates today: the iron cage, Eisernes Gehäuse. This powerful image illustrates how the advance of rationalization, bureaucratization, and the systematic organization of social and economic life traps the individual within a suffocating and seemingly inescapable structure. But why does modern life, with all its technological advances and comforts, feel like a prison? Weber explains that as society evolves, it becomes increasingly dominated by rules, procedures, and rational calculations that, while optimizing efficiency, drastically reduce individual freedom. Bureaucracy, for example, with its rigid rules, hierarchies, and standardizations, leaves little room for free will and personal creativity. This rationalization is not only a feature of work organizations, but also invades our personal lives. From the rigid time we wake up to the meticulous planning of our routines, we are shaped by a system that values predictability and control over subjective well-being. The iron cage is not made of visible bars, but of invisible norms that force us to live according to roles, metrics, and results. For Weber, the loss of the enchantment of the traditional world, marked by symbolic values, rituals, and spirituality, is replaced by disenchantment. The world loses its mystery and meaning, becoming a predictable and impersonal machine. This mechanicality causes a feeling of alienation and emptiness, because the individual finds himself reduced to a mere executor within the system. Although rationalization brings remarkable advances to civilization, such as economic organization and the expansion of knowledge, it also imposes a cost: the loss of humanity in its fullest expression. Modern man is often a prisoner who knows little about the cage in which he is imprisoned. Max Weber observed that bureaucracy became the predominant organizational form in modern society, especially since the Industrial Revolution. Unlike previous forms of organization based on traditions or charisma, bureaucracy is characterized by a rational, hierarchical, impersonal structure based on clear, codified rules. This structure, while effective in coordinating large economic and governmental operations, creates a complex web of control that limits individual autonomy. Each person within the bureaucracy is seen as a cog, a functional role, and their value is measured by their ability to perform tasks according to established norms, not by their creativity or humanity. This impersonality, which ensures predictability and stability, produces a paradoxical effect. While it makes processes efficient, it disconnects people from meaning and intrinsic motivation. Professional and, in many cases, personal life is structured as a system of rigid roles that stifle spontaneity and individuality. Furthermore, bureaucracy creates an environment where extreme specialization, although necessary, ends up creating fragmented professionals who lose sight of the bigger picture and become tied to specific, almost mechanical tasks. The complexity of demands increases, and the overload of rules can generate dehumanization, stress, and a deep sense of alienation.
What Weber called rationalization is therefore a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it brings progress and organization. On the other, it generates an invisible prison, because individuals feel trapped in a system that controls not only their work, but also their time and mental energy. In everyday life, this reality translates into exhausting workdays, pressure to be productive, and the constant feeling of being in a race against the clock.
The freedom to choose what to do and when to do it is largely sacrificed in the name of efficiency. Leisure is also often regulated and planned, becoming just another item on the to-do list. This model has spread beyond economic and governmental organizations, influencing schools, hospitals, and even social relationships, shaping life under a technical logic that sees everything as a resource to be managed. This structure is one of the main reasons why Weber's iron cage remains so present today. The individual lives in a routine where the unexpected and the spontaneous are seen as threats to order, and freedom becomes a distant and abstract concept. But are there no ways out of this cage? Weber does not offer easy answers, but invites us to reflect on the cost of rationality and to seek ways to humanize our existence, even within the limitations of the system. Another central concept in Max Weber's work that deepens the sense of imprisonment in modern life is the disenchantment of the world, Entzauberung der Welt. This term describes the transition from a reality charged with symbolic, spiritual, and mystical meaning to a world dominated by cold reason and instrumental logic. In traditional society, people viewed the world as a place full of mysteries, supernatural forces, and transcendental values that gave meaning to existence. Rituals, religious beliefs, and myths were an integral part of everyday life, providing a symbolic framework that guided behavior and expectations. With modernity, science and rationality began to replace these paradigms, explaining phenomena previously attributed to the supernatural through natural laws and scientific techniques. Bureaucracy and technology began to govern not only social structures, but also the perception of the world, making everything quantifiable, measurable, and predictable. This process of disenchantment has a profound effect on the individual. The world loses its magical character, its fascination, and its sacredness. Life, once full of purpose and spiritual connection, becomes a set of tasks and functions devoid of deeper meaning. The consequence is a generalized feeling of existential emptiness and alienation. For Weber, this loss of enchantment is not just a cultural phenomenon, but one of the main causes of the anguish of modernity. Contemporary man, confronted with the dehumanization of life and the absence of absolute values, feels helpless, lost in the midst of a society that values efficiency over meaning. This disillusionment is felt in several spheres. At work, where specialization and bureaucratic routine reduce the individual to a function, in social relationships, where human connections can seem superficial and instrumental, and in the search for purpose, which often finds only utilitarian or materialistic answers. The metaphor of the iron cage gains strength precisely because this rational structure that should free human beings ends up imprisoning them in a system that dehumanizes and alienates. Understanding this disenchantment is fundamental to understanding why so many feel that modern life is not fully lived, but merely endured. One of Max Weber's most famous studies is the analysis of the relationship between Protestant ethics, especially Calvinism, and the emergence of the capitalist spirit. According to Weber, religious morality profoundly influenced the mentality and economic behavior of modernity, establishing a new work ethic that, paradoxically, contributed to the iron cage. In the Protestant tradition, hard work, discipline and frugality are seen not only as virtues but as signs of divine grace. The idea of predestination and the need to prove oneself elect led to an obsession with material success as a form of spiritual validation. This deeply internalized value has made the modern individual a man of duty, incessantly dedicated to work and the accumulation of capital, often at the expense of rest, family, and emotional well-being. The Protestant ethic promoted a rationality that values control, productivity, and efficiency, transforming work into an end in itself and shaping the mentality that sustains bureaucracy and modern capitalism. This mentality has become a kind of moral and psychological prison. Man is not only trapped by bureaucratic structures, but also by a system of values that prevents him from seeking other forms of fulfillment that are not linked to material success and incessant discipline. Thus, the iron cage is not only a social and economic structure, but also an internal prison, where the individual condemns himself to slavery through adherence to a set of norms and expectations that limit his real freedom. The pressure to be productive and efficient at all times generates anxiety, stress, and in many cases, physical and emotional exhaustion, which we now recognize as burnout. Understanding this ethical and cultural dimension is essential to understanding why, even when faced with the possibility of personal choices, many feel incapable of breaking away from the routine that imprisons them. Max Weber also warns us of a growing phenomenon in modernity, the fragmentation of the self. As society becomes increasingly rationalized and bureaucratized, the individual begins to play multiple roles in different spheres of life, at work, in the family, in the community, which are often contradictory to each other. This multiplicity of identities fragments personal experience, making it difficult to maintain internal coherence and a sense of authenticity. Modern man is required to be efficient and rational at work, disciplined and planned in his personal life, flexible in social relationships, but at the same time, reserved and emotionally protected so as not to expose vulnerabilities. This constant performance drains emotional and mental energy, creating an existential void. The search for social recognition and external success replaces the genuine connection with one's own being. The pressure for results and the fear of failure generate anxiety and fear, imprisoning the individual within a persona constructed to survive in the system. Furthermore, social control exercised by institutions reinforces this fragmentation by demanding conformity and adaptation to specific norms, often disconnected from personal subjectivity. Individuality becomes a product shaped by external demands, and personal freedom is reduced to choosing between limited and predefined options. This disconnect between the true self and social masks is one of the invisible faces of the iron cage. The feeling of alienation is not only in the external environment, but also within the mind itself, where the individual struggles to reconcile the different parts of his or her identity. Weber does not offer an easy solution to this dilemma, but invites us to reflect on the need to rescue authenticity and personal meaning, even in the face of the impositions of the modern world. Despite Max Weber's bleak description of modern life, there is room for reflection on how to resist the iron cage and seek some degree of freedom and authenticity. Awareness of the invisible prison is already a crucial step towards transformation. Weber does not propose magic formulas, but his thinking opens up space to question excessive rationality and seek ways to humanize existence within the limits of the system. This movement can begin with the appreciation of spaces of personal freedom, where creativity, dialogue, and self-knowledge can flourish. Recovering the meaning of traditions, rituals, and symbolic values, even if reinterpreted, can help restore the enchantment of the world and the connection with a deeper dimension of life. Activities involving art, philosophy, spirituality, and authentic coexistence contribute to this process. Furthermore, cultivating a critical stance towards the system and its demands is essential to avoid automation and total alienation. This includes rethinking habits, questioning priorities, and seeking ways of life that balance productivity and existential quality. Self-control and taking care of mental and emotional health are essential aspects to resist the overload imposed by modernity. Mindfulness techniques, meditation, and practices that promote psychic balance are contemporary paths that dialogue with this search. Finally, solidarity and the building of communities based on human values and mutual respect represent a collective form of resistance to dehumanization. Weber recognized the importance of genuine social relationships for the meaning of life. Although the cage is rigid and extensive, small gestures of freedom and awareness can broaden horizons and open gaps for a less mechanical and more meaningful existence. Throughout this text, we explore Max Weber's profound critique of modernity, revealing how extreme rationalization and bureaucracy have created an invisible prison for the contemporary individual. The iron cage symbolizes the structure that, although efficient and necessary for the functioning of modern societies, stifles freedom, creativity, and the meaning of life. This imprisonment is not only external, but internal, where modern man lives fragmented, alienated, and disenchanted, trapped both by the demands of the system and by the values he himself has internalized. The disenchantment of the world, the Protestant work ethic, the fragmentation of identity, and the impersonal routine converge into a reality where man is simultaneously actor and prisoner. However, this analysis should not be seen as a fatalistic diagnosis. It serves as an invitation to reflect deeply on what it means to live fully in modernity. Recognizing the existence of the cage is the first step towards questioning its limits and seeking ways to transcend it. Transformation requires courage to challenge the system, even if gradually, valuing authenticity, contact with personal meaning, and the recovery of the symbolic dimension of life. It also implies the cultivation of true human relationships and the search for a balance between necessary rationality and lost enchantment. Weber did not promise a ready-made solution, but he opened a door for dialogue between past and future, between reason and spirit, between the social structure and the individual. It is up to each of us to decide how to navigate this complex reality, seeking not only to survive, but to truly live. May this text be a stimulus for you to reflect on your own cage and find, even in the smallest gaps, possibilities for freedom